Hi, and welcome back to Let's Talk with Parul. The 16 days from November 25th to December 10th every year are observed as the 16 days of activism against violence, against gender-based violence, violence against women. It's a reminder that this kind of violence still exists, continues to destroy lives, and that action lies in our hands. It's also an important reminder to encourage women to speak out because the impact of remaining silent is devastating. It allows gender based violence to continue unchecked. That is why we are bringing up this critical conversation that just needs to happen. And not just in these 16 days, it needs to happen continuously and consistently. My guests today are two women who are leading these conversations on an ongoing basis and are making the impact that we desperately need on social mindsets. Please welcome Komal Khanna. She's the chief of party for the USAID-funded SHOPS Plus and ABT with ABT Associates, with over 28 years of strategic management experience in the private and development sectors. Komal has been a crucial driver of innovative public health projects that have received various accolades, the Prime Minister's Award included, and of course, lots of recognition at the national level. Komal's other very challenging task is being a mother to a young man and a teenage boy. Welcome, Komal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Parul. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and talk about the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Of course. And we also have with us Sohini Bhattacharya. Sohini is president and CEO of Breakthrough India, and she's spearheading programs using multimedia, popular culture, leadership development, and community mobilization strategies to prevent gender-based violence. She's an intrepid entrepreneur and social change enthusiast who has over 25 years of experience in the development sector. Sohini also sits on the board of Dastakar, Kolkata Sunway. She's a trustee of Read India, a sister concern of Read Global, creating community-led sustainable libraries. Thank you so much for joining us, Sohini.
Thank you for having me, Parul. And it's a very important conversation from where I sit, and we're lovely to have it with as many people as we can.
Absolutely. And today you're going to be addressing parents, you're going to be addressing mums. And I think it's a really, really important platform because a lot of the action can happen at our level, at the individual level. In fact, that's what I wanted to talk about because we know that, broadly prevention of gender-based violence needs efforts at several levels. We need education, we need awareness raising, we need legislation to not just protect women and girls, but also to appropriately penalize the perpetrators. And of course, we need adequate support for survivors. And because there is so much involved, I think very often people just tend to dismiss it. How can I possibly do all of this? So on this platform, we try and focus on our roles of it as individuals. What can I do as mums, as being an important instigator of change? Because that's what we strongly believe mothers are. After one of our earlier discussions on preventing rape culture, we put together a what can I do list, a very simple what can I do list. And I'd like to play that right now. Siddhant, if you can help me with that. So what can I do? To start with, don't support inappropriate, sexist or misogynistic imagery in media, movies, songs, stand-up comedy, news channels, all of it has some of it. Call out sexist comments, jokes, maa behan ki gali in the workplace, in social circles. Sensitize the men in my life to do the same. Raise my children in a gender-sensitive environment, not assigning gender-based roles and encouraging choices, not stereotypes. The next slide, please. This is, of course, at the core of it all, bring up my sons to respect women, understand consent. Boys need to understand that eve teasing is not fun, and all of this can happen irrespective of economic social status. I need to extend this understanding to my support staff, to my house help, drivers, clerical office staff, factory workers. I need to respect and celebrate diversity. Sex ed, sex education, age-appropriate sessions starting early, updated and repeated periodically with or without professional help for my children and for those of office or home workers. So there it is. This is a very broad list that we had put together. We were talking about a specific subject, rape culture, about, the mindset, about how easy it is for men to just take the same old stereotypes for granted and think that, they're entitled to eve tease, to propagate those stereotypes कि नहीं ये लड़की का काम है, ये लड़की का काम है. So I'd like, to use this platform today. Our agenda today is essentially to, of course, revisit some of these points and to broaden the scope of what we can do, to build further on this list, create a personal charter for all of us to counter any of those hum kya kar sakte hain kind of questions. So to start with, Komal, I'd like to ask you, we just said that, there are several levels that are involved in talking about prevention of gender-based violence. And I think one of those things starts with recognizing what comprises violence. Because many times women don't even realize that they're in an abusive situation. In your experience, why is that?
It's because I think we are in a patriarchal society where men want to assert their authority and dominance. And this has been ingrained in our cultures and society for a long time. And, there are gender inequalities that have existed, and women have accepted that part of their life, and accepted that as part of their gender role. So, on one level, we know that, men are conditioned to be authoritative, and, sometimes there is no scope for conversations, and they do not look at women as equals. And the decision of the man in the family is, final. And, and they're not so sensitive to women's needs. And this is also because of the conditioning or the social cultural norms that we've all grown up in, right? In our own families, right? We know that this conditioning starts from home, right? And women, on the other hand, are, just, told that, okay, fine, even if you're facing some kind of a challenge at home, just comply with your husband's, whatever he says, right? Then, your subservience to your husband is your duty to make him happy, right? There is some fear of, there are some repercussions, the fear of abandonment, or, some deterioration in their relationship, because of which the women are not able to speak, right? So these are the way we have all grown up in our homes, in our societies, in our cultures. But I think it's about recognizing that, there are gender inequalities, but how do we as women recognize those inequalities and ensure that they're not carried on further, into the next generation? They're not accepted, and we are at par, at equal with the men in our families, right? And there is no reason for us to not state what has to be stated or speak our mind. I think that's very important. Yeah.
Absolutely, so agree with you over there. And it is time, like you said, it's time that that silence has to be broken. Sohini, which brings me to another aspect of this very point, that there is this certain socio-economic snobbery as far as acknowledgement of violence against women is concerned. This whole thing of it happens to a certain type of people, it happens to other people, hamare ghar mein nahi hota hai. And we wear these blinkers and we refuse to recognize oftentimes what's going on right below our noses. But what is the reality? Isn't it prevalent everywhere? And what really can we do, as a bystander, as somebody who's a neighbor, a friend, a family member?
And I agree with everything that Komal just said. The reality is that violence against women and girls cuts through, class, caste, race, religion, urban, rural. Activists for long considered this as a pandemic for years before this other pandemic hit us, right? The reality is that worldwide, 1 out of 3 women face intimate partner violence in their lives. And this has been corroborated by the last National Family Health Survey done in India in 2016-17, and has been triangulated with data from NCRB, the National Crime Records Bureau, as late as 2018. And, this after many cases go unreported because women, first of all, they do not know the mechanism of actually lodging formal complaints, and then they don't want to draw attention to themselves or get discriminated and stigmatized because they have gone against family, so to say. So one of the things that I'd like to say is that in India, violence is normalized, even among women who are, otherwise empowered to say no to violence. Even they, often end up kind of grin and bear it, right? And what the perpetrator may make you believe that this was one time and this will not happen again. And so you also think that it happened once and it will not happen again. So And violence does not have to be always physical. That's something that we always talk to people about, that intimate partner violence includes verbal, emotional, and psychological
Right.
violence, which is
Right.
sometimes very nuanced and you might not recognize it as violence. And as Komal said, cultural and social norms encourage violence. So, rules or expectations of behaviors, which we call norms, within a cultural or social group encourages violence. So it is important to address that. And often out of love for domestic peace or fear of, confronting such violent behavior, we say it's okay to tolerate such behavior. So we oversee small incidents, that smack of power and control, justifying them as something that one does out of love and maybe will not
Right.
happen again.
Right.
Uh,
Absolutely. And like you said, I think what is missed a lot of times is that psychological or that emotional abuse, verbal abuse. A lot of us don't even realize that is happening.
yeah.
So this I just wanted to just add on one point here,
Yes,
Parul,
sir.
that even data says that as per UN that more than 60% of women survivors of violence do not disclose or seek any kind of help. Right. So imagine, to speak up, to even say that they are being violated, they don't have the agency or the confidence to do that. And,
Right.
so there are various reasons for that, because they don't want to escalate it because of, the family honor, and there is a lack of support system sometimes from friends, or social support systems do not exist, and there is of course the lack of awareness also sometimes, that are there any facilities where they can go and access some support, so that challenge remains. And the bigger challenge is that a lot of low self-esteem because of this repeated incidents, like so Sohini was saying, right, they don't even recognize, they normalize it. So because of the repeated incidents, they start having a low self-esteem, think that this is their fate, and they resign to that, and that they don't take any action against it, so this is what they're going to live with. So that kind of a dissonance exists, and it's just they start rationalizing violence is normal, it's happened only once, how does it matter,
Yeah.
you know
Right.
so that's what
Absolutely.
yeah.
We've got Aruna, you were asking if you can ask a question. Yes, please. I'd like to tell the audience, if you have questions, if there are aspects of gender-based violence that you'd like us to discuss, please do put them over here. We'll bring them up as the conversation proceeds. But we've got Rashmi agreeing that violence is more mental and psychological, which is true. And which is why, as you were saying, that it's very difficult to recognize. And again, you feel ki acha theek hai, agli baar nahi hoga. This is a one-time thing. My question actually now is really to do with the shadow pandemic. We've talked about that. You just mentioned it, that the shadow pandemic of violence before this pandemic came, of abuse and violence. A lot of women in our community have also experienced a surge of abuse since March this year. So this has really been happening. It's a different world right now. We are locked down. There is lack of mobility. There's lack of access of any kind of communication. So, Sohini, I want to ask you that, for women who are suffering and, basically they're just suffering right now because there is really nothing else that they can do at present. What is the action that we can take? How do I reach
so
out to them?
So one of the things that we often talk about bystander action in this,
Yes.
bystander action when intimate partner violence is there. So one of the things is that as a bystander, I think one should be aware oneself first, and then create an awareness for others on what stands for violence. Like I said, what is what's the gamut of activities, I was speaking to kind of influencers group once, during this lockdown, and somebody said that my partner checks my credit card bills, and I get very angry about it, but I don't say anything about it. Now, is it all right to check your partner's credit card bills? Because then, you are controlling that whole financial activity. I can understand having a healthy discussion about what to spend and what
Yes.
not to spend, especially when there's a lockdown situation, but doing it surreptitiously behind your back is not acceptable. But, I'm not aware enough to actually say that is not, that I have to call out that kind of behavior. So that's the first thing and foremost thing that we as women can also do to help other women, is that reassuring each other that it is okay to say no to such behavior, that it's not okay to lie down and accept that kind of behavior. And bystander action can also involve letting the perpetrator know that someone is watching. We ran a campaign in 2008 called Bell Bajao, which asked men and boys to stand up and intervene in a situation of violence by taking a simple action like ringing the bell. What does ringing the bell actually mean? It means that there's a moment of interruption when the violence is happening. The perpetrator knows that somebody is watching, and the abuser may find some time to maybe hide herself in the toilet or run out of the house or make a phone call. So that point of interruption is very important. So during this lockdown, we often ask people to actually knock on the other, the flat where there was violence coming in, to let them know that somebody is watching, and
watching. Right.
The abused person is not alone. The victim or the survivor is not alone in this world. There is somebody watching. So those are small things that we can actually do. Being there for a victim or a survivor as a patient listener, knocking on the door in the middle of what is obviously a sign of turmoil within, checking on such people who you are aware is at the receiving end, willing to just, put them up for a night if possible or needed, taking them out for a coffee, if that's needed very much. Sometimes people just want to go out and talk about it, sharing with them numbers of helpline, making them aware of the law. Those are, that entire gamut of things that we could actually do.
Sohini, before I move on to Aruna's question, I have a sub-question to what you're talking about, that there is also this fear that the violence may be exasperated, in case there is some interference that is noticed. So is that a valid fear that, in case the abuser gets to know that there's someone watching or suspects that the victim has gone and talked to somebody else, the violence may just escalate? So is that a valid fear?
It's a yes and a no. Sometimes people stop when they know other people are watching, momentarily, probably not for a long term, but momentarily probably people stop. And sometimes it can actually backfire, and people might say, oh, so you've been talking to so and so behind my back. So I think 2 or 3 things need to happen. One is, of course, you need to talk to other people. You need to actually prepare yourself to learn more about what the law is. What can I do? We heard of an incident in Pune during the lockdown where the Pune municipality commissioner actually came and ousted, this man, and took him out of the home and put him up at one of those coronavirus, quarantine, places. Now everybody said, oh, wow, what an innovative idea. But within the domestic violence law, if there is a case of violence, the perpetrator can be removed by the police forcefully from the premise. People do not know about these laws.
People don't know that. That's true.
Yeah, it's imperative to kind of, make yourself familiar with the law and understand that and know it. And there is repercussion. There are legal actions that can be taken. There are police actions that can be taken. People should know that. That also instills a little bit of fear in them. Yeah,
absolutely right. Well, Aruna's question is, being an earning woman, though I carry out all my duties, I've been harassed mentally. I just don't understand what to do. As I say something which is correct, I don't hurt anyone's sentiment. Even then, I am disturbed mentally by others. This, I know maybe each question requires a very, a direct answer, maybe a very personal answer, but broadly, Sohini and Komal, what would you have to say to someone who herself is being harassed mentally by the family members? She's not specified right now, but let's just answer that on a broader scope.
I think I think on a personal level, I think it's good to have a safety net around you, like your own family and friends you can reach out to begin with, right? That's very important, that you could go and open up to somebody that you trust, right? Who would not judge you. And secondly, there are these organizations which are working specifically on these issues, and they provide counseling. They have helplines. And we also collaborating with one such organization called Shaktishalini for a campaign. So they are, professional counselors, and they can actually help you and guide you how to handle this situation. And as I understand that, this counseling is not a 1 day, 2 day job. It's just about, it takes months for them to strengthen, the agency of that woman to actually, make that voice be heard in the family, right? And, stand up for what she needs to, because most of these women don't want to take any kind of action against the families, yeah, when that happens, right? But they still have to work within the families to, open the communication channels to, state what they have to state. So how do you do that if you lose your confidence, right? So that's important, that you take the right help and support from your, friends, family, and from professional organizations who are handling domestic violence.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, and absolutely right, and as Komal rightly says, counseling can take months, years actually. But I think one thing to do is to also let the person who's doing this know that this is not acceptable. Because, sometimes what happens is that because of social conditioning, people are used to a certain way of behavior. And sometimes, just like 42% of women say it's okay to be beaten once in a while, I might not know that this kind of behavior is actually harmful or actually unacceptable by the other person. So the first thing I think would be to open up a dialogue and say that this behavior is not acceptable. Maybe that behavior will stop if the other person knows that behavior is not accepted by the other person. But of course, many often we know that people know that this kind of behavior is not acceptable, yet they continue to do that. So.
Right. And I think from what you've said, you've also answered Mohana's question to a large extent. Mohana wanted to know, how can we make the victim realize that she's going through domestic violence as the victims normalize the violence, which we've spoken about right now. Even if the family members want to help the victim, she chooses not to help herself, especially when a child is involved in the situation. That's when the months of counseling probably play a role, and the first thing starts with awareness and having a sounding board, like you said, Komal. First get your support system in place.
Right. But sometimes what happens, I feel, Parul, is that the communication also breaks down, because of the violence, So if there is no communication that happens between the couples, so it's very important, like Sohini said, to open that communication, to have that dialogue, and the counseling might help to, enable that person to do that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's a very valid point. Yes, Sohini.
The other thing is that having a child sometimes comes in the way of, of actually taking an action on that. Mothers fear that, what will be the repercussion on my child for this? I always, whenever we talk about this, we always say that remember that announcement that happens when you're boarding a flight. Put the oxygen mask on yourself and then put it to your child or somebody who needs assistance. Because if you are gasping for breath, you're not going to be able to help anybody. So that's something that I feel important to mention.
No, and on that point, I'd like to, quote Sonakshi, who was there with us on a previous episode of Let's Talk with Parul, where we discussed domestic violence. Sonakshi has grown up in a house of violence. I mean, her mother was very, very brutally beaten up. Now, her point was that, for the longest time, her mother stayed on in that particular environment because of the children, because she did not have the confidence or the financial wherewithal at that time to just step out and, make life on her own. But when things came to a head and her younger child stopped talking, she took that chance and she went out of that marriage, walked out of that marriage. So now she says that I'm so much better off out than I would have been in an environment where there was the constant conflict. Growing up in that kind of an environment would have been far more damaging. Today, she herself has studied gender studies. She herself is an activist. She herself is working in this field and is being able to put all the trauma that she may have grown with into such positive action. So I think that she's a fabulous example of just this very fact that, a lot of times what women feel may actually be their positive or their action point. Komal, we were talking about various kinds of violence. So I'd just like to move on to that aspect of it. Specifically talking about motherhood. There are these long-standing and serious repercussions on women, when they're denied the simple use of contraception. And I know that you have been working on this area for a long time. Could you elaborate on that? And, let's also talk about how that constitutes a form of violence.
Yeah, I think that's something that we've been working on for some time now. As Sohini just mentioned that, as per WHO, 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced some kind of physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner. And most of these women tend to believe and consider only physical forms of violence as violence, right?
Right.
So, what about the sexual violence? So if we see that, from the research which has been given by the Global Population Research Bureau, says that there's a clear linkage between intimate partner violence and unwanted pregnancies in women, because women who are facing intimate partner violence are not able to choose when to have sex. They're not able to insist on the contraception, and they're not able to effectively consistently use contraception. So this interferes with a woman's ability to make a decision on contraception, which is denied to her, and that leads to unwanted pregnancy. And this, of course, has adverse effects on women's reproductive and sexual health. And when we talk about this issue, we also would like to touch upon this issue of reproductive coercion. Like, so women who experience IPV are likely to suffer from reproductive coercion. And let me just clarify what it means. It means that a woman's autonomous decision making to use contraception and leads to pressure to become pregnant or terminate pregnancy. Right. So this is under pressure that they are made to become pregnant or terminate their pregnancies. And we have research that state that denial of contraception is a form of violence, that it's a woman's right to make the choice of contraceptive, and her partner should respect her choice to choose the method that's most appropriate to her. And if she's denied that, then that's not right. So the USAID programs are generally focused on integrating gender and greater gender equity into the family planning programs, because so that women are given greater decision making power in their marital relationship, and that leads to less unwanted pregnancy. And if we see, there is a gender equity plays a very important role in shaping a woman's ability to manage her own fertility intentions. And we see a lot of UN reports right now which are coming after the COVID pandemic, how it has deepened the inequalities, and also millions of more women and girls are now at risk and of losing the ability to plan their families and protect their bodies and their health. So COVID has really made an enormous impact on women's health, because the health systems have been overloaded, they've been compromised, and a lot of services have been limited. So women who were
Right.
using family planning methods earlier, are not able to access those methods now. So that's become a very big issue. And as per UNFA and other private partner organizations, which is, I'm talking about a report in April, said that if this lockdown continues for 6 months, there are going to be 7 million unintended pregnancies globally. So you can imagine the impact of this pandemic and impact of IPV, which is happening right now. So, but women do not recognize what this
Don't
is.
recognize it exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So that's the whole challenge that we face, and they accept it as normal life. So what we decided is that we work on family planning programs, right? We are the largest family planning program of USAID in the country. But we said that this is a very emerging and important need, because in COVID, you know, domestic violence increased 300%. So we said, okay, let's work on a digital campaign, and we are happy to partner with Moms Presso, and
Right.
we're now working on a digital campaign that talks about 4 main objectives. So can I just share that, Parul?
Please, please,
Or would you like to
absolutely.
talk about that?
No, no, please go ahead.
So
Please
this
go
is
ahead.
on the annual, and this is going to be launched very soon. So what are we planning to do here is we want to increase the knowledge of women as to what constitutes intimate partner violence to begin with. So women have to recognize this in its early stages and call it out immediately, so that women are empowered to stop it at that point of time, not let that go up, right? Then to create awareness so that women understand that denial of contraception is also a form of violence, which is not yet understood by women, by research that you only had conducted. So when we help them understand that the impact of intimate partner violence can have an interference with the contraceptive methods, and lead to unprotected sex, they need to take some action. So what action can they take? That is what they have to decide for themselves. But what we are doing is that we're building the self-efficacy of these women with the right information about family planning choices, and we empowering them with the support to offer safe and confidential resource. This is a family planning helpline, which can give them the credible and confidential information on the various methods of contraception. So then when we do that, we are also going beyond that. The clear call to action in this campaign is that they call a family planning helpline. But if they want to address an issue of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, we're linking them to another NGO called Shakti Shalini, and the counselors of that NGO will be helping them, with their counseling. So that's how we are doing this campaign. And in fact, I just want to refer to the online survey that you only conducted, which said that there is a need to create awareness, because 82% of the respondents with kids do not consider denied use of contraception as a part of domestic violence, and 70% of the women don't consider denied use of contraception as form of domestic violence in general. So with children or without children, they do not consider that this is an important issue, right? So that's the need to bring it out, to kind of handle it and give the power to the women to make the right choices for their own lives and their health. Yeah,
absolutely. And we're so happy to partner in this, because at the end of the day, we realize from the survey itself, these figures are just very, very high. Imagine having, so many people, 3/4 of our population, our community, not even realizing that this is an integral part of violence, that this is not something which can be allowed to go on. And denial of contraception has been overlooked completely, simply because of social conditioning. Hum aurte hain, hame to maa banna hai, and we don't even have the choice. And I think even women who are happy to become mothers at a certain stage do not realize that, okay, I am in control. I should be able to have a voice in this. It has to be my choice as to when, my choice together, along with my husband. It has to be a combined decision. It has to be a mutual decision as to when we plan our family, when we have our babies. Sohini, I'm sure you must have come across several cases of sexual coercion, like Komal mentioned, reproductive coercion. And do you also feel that largely women are just overlooking this as a form of violation, as a form of abuse?
Yeah, I mean, with our campaigns, with Bell Bajao in from 2008 to 2013, we saw that actually when you create awareness on intimate partner violence, domestic violence as it was, and when you talk about it not being a personal problem, but it being a community level problem, when you perceive as that, and when you talk to men and boys, we found that with our program, contraception use among the population where we were working went up by 15%, which was huge, and the demand for services on domestic violence went up by 26%, which was fantastic, because but which was sad also, because you create that demand, but on the other hand, services for this was so abysmal, and it still is so lacking, that it's difficult to then, compromise with that kind of a thing. But yes, this and also psychological violence and then verbal violence. We worked with about 10,000 women in 3 factories in Faridabad. Garment factories where women work in large numbers, and they came from nearby colonies. And what we found is that they had no idea about what actually constitutes violence other than physical violence. And we found that after an intervention for 3 years, we find 96% of women actually recognize 3 forms of violence, at least, physical, verbal, and psychological or emotional violence in their lives, not just at their homes, but also at the factory setting, at the workplace, where it is also very common. So yes, there is a need to actually talk about these nuanced things which are not constitute per se as violence, because ek thappar is really what people understand violence by, but it's just not ek thappar. So
absolutely. And I'm so glad that you also outlined the areas. We're talking about violence at home, we're talking about violence at the workplace, and violence in public spaces, on the street, which we have all faced growing up, in buses, in DTC buses, and everywhere. We have all faced that. And right now, I think, moms of my generation, we are so protective about our daughters. A lot of times my children ask me that, will you never let us go out by bus? And I'm actually thinking about it, maybe not. Because I know we faced it so often that unless there is this crazy mindset change, which will definitely take 2 generations, if not more, I'm not going to be able to be at ease letting the girls out, on their own, using public transport, that would mass public transport.
True.
Well, Sonia, I'm going to stick with you for the next question as well, which is to do with the action plan. We've talked about stakeholders in this whole endeavor. We've talked about various types of violence, the places where gender-based violence is present, and you've got the numbers out as well. Every third woman is facing some sort of violence. More than half of women actually believe that it's okay for a husband to hit a wife. So we need this very, very long-term strategy to combat violence against women. How do we start at home? What is the first point that we can actually own and put into action immediately?
So, traditional beliefs that men have a right to control or discipline women through physical actions or verbal action makes women vulnerable to violence by intimate partners. And it even places girls at a risk of sexual abuse. Very often we know that, young girls growing up face sexual abuse, and 93% of times it's from somebody that she knows. Yeah. So we have to be, while we are talking about women, I have to bring in the issue of girls here as well. Equally, cultural acceptance of violence, including intimate partner violence, is important as a private affair. It's important to kind of recognize that we accept it as a private affair that hinders outside intervention, and that prevents people who are going through it from speaking out. So we have to recognize that this is not a private affair. Yeah. And there's no need to feel stigmatized. I think 2 or 3 things I have to speak a little at length here. One is that violent households lead to intimate partner violence. Children growing up watching violence at home thinks this is normal behavior. Punishments against children, physical punishments against children, are results that these same children might resort to violence as adults. So developing a safe, stable, and nurturing relationships between children and their parents and the entire, the extended ecosystem is very, very important. Parents, children are at a very great risk of being abused when their mothers are also facing that kind of an abuse, right? So very often, the lack of a safe, stable, and nurturing relationship in childhood leads to long-lasting effects when you grow up. It leads to anxiety, low self-esteem, difficulty in forming relationships, but also increased risks of violence. So please, I think a kind of parenting what shall I say, workshop, whatever it is actually very essential, especially for young parents, when they're going through that, where you teach, parenting skills, where you teach how to support healthy child development, because, today's child might be the husband of tomorrow who's doing the same thing he has watched his father do. And social support groups, like Komal also said, a safety net. Those are some of the key things that you can actually look at. The other thing is that alcohol abuse is a very, very big, thing here to talk about. Households where we have seen, strong association between alcohol consumption and violent behavior. Households where, where alcohol is, high levels of alcohol are tolerated, sometimes actually creates problems. So alcohol can be used as a justification for violent behavior, or it might be consumed to fuel the courage to commit violent things. So interventions that tackle it from risky behavior, or drinking behavior, or or social expectations surrounding alcohol, can actually help prevent violence. And the third thing, which I cannot really emphasize more on, talking about gender equality to young children, developing life skills among children and adolescents while they are growing up to improve, social and emotional competence, to induce what you said, Parul, also, right, and came out from that rape culture presentation also, induce respect and understanding consent. These two, I think, are the most important things that we need to do with our children at home. Just keep talking about it. Keep talking about these kind of things so that children understand, that it is not okay. It is not okay to do certain things without the consent of another person, or it is not okay to also tolerate this kind of behavior from others. So I cannot emphasize on this more, because differences in
Right.
roles and behaviors really creates gender inequalities, which then increase the risk of violence by both men and by men against women, and it hinders victims' ability to actually remove themselves from that situation and seek support or help. So these are my three, actually really strong points.
Very strong points for sure. Absolutely. I can see these things being simple enough for us to implement in our houses. Komal, would you like to add to that? Because again, we're talking as two mothers, as stakeholders in this entire process of change. So, both of you as mums, of course, a lot of it must be coming from a very personal space as well. And Komal, you as mums of boys, as a mum of boys, you, I'm sure, have already put a lot of these things into practice. What do you think has worked? And what is it that you would like to emphasize, like Sohini's list?
Yeah, in fact, I agree with Sohini. The two things that we talk about is respect and consent. And being a mother of a young man, that's what I've been trying to tell him, since he became 18 years of age, because I think that's very important, right? They have to understand this very well. But the fact is that we don't obviously know about, whatever our children are doing outside the house. But all we can say is that we have to show that path. We have to be those role models, right? As mothers, trying to, whenever, like Sohini mentioned, right? There were these songs being played by my son, right? These are rap songs, and sometimes there were a lot of demeaning words for women being used. And I said, you enjoy these songs. Don't you think these words are not good? He says, yes, I understand what you're saying, but it's just that I like the music. So the fact is that, you have to keep pointing out the anomalies. Right? If you don't point out anomalies, they will never be sensitized. So how do we sensitize the children to these issues in our own homes? That you need to respect women. You need to treat women as equal, right? And sometimes, he tells me that don't get into the kitchen and do this for me. I'll do it myself, right? You're busy with your work. So you see those little things that, are from your own children as they grow up. That yes, they recognize that, all of us are all independent in that way. But at the same time, it's just not that the woman's responsibility to do everything at home. Right, so we also have to take up that responsibility. So I think we have to inculcate those values, I think, at home, and your husband's support is very important, right? So without they grow up looking at their father. So when your husband's supportive, then obviously the children will grow up in that environment. So, and you have to make sure that happens, right? So
Komal, you made a point about, about pointing out the anomalies, pointing out something. And I know, Sohini, you already shared with us, Breakthrough has done a campaign on that. We have a film which we'd like to play for everybody to see. And it's a great example of what mums can do. If we can just play that video.
ये टोन चेंज कर दो।
क्यों मॉम?
बदल दो।
पर क्यों?
क्योंकि रोज जब मैं ऑफिस जाती हूँ कुछ लोग मुझे देखकर ऐसी ही सीटी मारते हैं और मैं सीटियों से थक गई हूँ।
Share your story with your son. Don't let what happened to you happen to another woman. To share your story, click on this link.
A great representation of what we need to do, a great example. Sohini, would you like to elaborate on this particular campaign? Because I know you've done it at several levels.
Yeah, so this was when we were just started working on sexual harassment, and we understood that if domestic violence was difficult for people to understand, sexual harassment is even more difficult for people to understand. And there is so much normalization that happens. We call it eve teasing, which is,
Yeah.
lightening the whole tone.
Absolutely.
And boys think of it as time pass hai, but nothing else. And so when we sat a group of boys and sat a group of girls together, and boys said, "Hamare paas ye just time pass hai," and then the girls said, "Aapke paas jo time pass hai, it's a question of life for us, because then our parents take us off school and make us sit at home." So we wanted to actually reach mothers, and there was a lot of discussion like, why are we putting the onus on mothers? But we thought that since mothers are, females and who have gone through, sexual harassment themselves, they're best positioned to talk about it to their sons and say that this is not an okay behavior, this is not time pass, this is not fun, this is something very serious. So we did actually a couple of ads showing a couple of socioeconomic economic levels, and the ads actually reach about 15 million people, and there was a lot of people writing in. We did a whole thing of share your story, and there's this radio jockey called Khurafati Nitin, and we approached Big FM for a story, and he went and spoke about it to his mother, and his mother said, "Yes, of course, I have also been sexually harassed," and he brought her to a radio program, and she spoke about it there, and that kind of ripples it created in small towns like Lucknow and Patna, where all of this aired, was fabulous. I mean, he still talks about it. I was doing a conversation with Big FM, employees last week actually, and he brought it up, and there was there's so much acceptance of that a simple thing, can we talk about our boys about this? It's
Right.
So it's a simple call to action, but it's done. It's doable by everybody.
I think that is a great call to action. Really share your story with your son. There couldn't be anything more effective, because it becomes personal then. You see, at some level, it's again, one of those mindsets ki ye kahin aur hota hai. It happens to a certain set of people. And then this whole very, very disturbing concept of she was asking for it. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, of course.
Yeah.
But the minute we share our stories, it becomes personal. I think that little level of understanding increases quite substantially, in fact. I'd like to add one more point to everything that we've talked about, and we did bring it up in our slides earlier, was that, we are all in a place of privilege. And from this place of privilege, I think the least that we can do is to make sure that the help that comes to our house, the workers in our factories, in our houses, domestic, official, whatever, we're able to share some of this information. When we talk about intimate partner violence, when we talk about denial of contraception, when we're talking about raising awareness, this is a very, very important and a simple thing that we can do sitting in our homes, sitting in an environment of lockdown, whether it's, going out or sitting at home. If we talk to another 5 people, it's really one of those each one teach one kind of situations. Talk to 5 people, talk to 5 women who are working for you, coming to your house, helping you with something, and just, increase awareness. There is a chain reaction, and there is a ripple effect that we can create by something as simple as this. I think we've talked about a lot of things, but underlying the underlying well, I would just say that, we know that at the end of the day, violence against women is never acceptable. We can't excuse it. We cannot tolerate it. And there is a lot that we can do ourselves to prevent it, as we have heard from Sohini, as we have heard from Komal, and as we have been hearing over the years. I mean, there are a lot of things which we know about, which we simply don't implement. So perhaps the call to action for all of us is now to get working on that. Let's get action oriented, and let's actually get to do things that we've always planned and talked about. And we've got a lot of tips from Sohini and Komal today. So I think that is something we can start implementing right away. Thank you so much, Sohini and Komal. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for your very, very valuable inputs. Yes, Sohini, you're saying something.
I was saying, please join our campaign on bystander action. We are launching a big campaign on bystander action over the next few months, and it will continue for years. That's the plan. It's called Dakhaldo, and Dakhaldo, and we are also, we're going to train young people on how to actually be effective bystanders or upstanders in this. So we will share with you, the link when the time comes, and please kind of share it in your network and join our campaign. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I think that's a great thing to do, because a lot of us are also confused about that aspect. From the other side, like I mentioned in one of my questions, that what do we do from the other side of the fence? How do we actually, intervene or not? So that'll be a great some value add to whatever everybody knows already. So yes, Komal, I think closing
Yeah,
words from you now.
just that call out for the campaign that we're launching on the Momspresso platform, which talks about intimate partner violence. And please do join us in the campaign. Like even Parul said, reach out to 5 more people and talk about it, and give us your viewpoints and raise the issue. So that's what we'd like. Thank you.
We'll be launching that within the next few days. So yes, we're looking forward to that as well. And we're looking forward to action from everybody. Please keep writing to us and telling us, asking us questions, telling us what you have been doing, what works for you. I know a lot of blogs come in, a lot of questions come in on our support groups as well. So please keep that engagement going on. It's important to continue to have these conversations, and we're very happy to be a platform that supports it. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you once again, Sohini and Komal.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.